All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome back for another edition of Open Science Presentations. Been off for a few weeks following Science Blues of 2.0. So I'm glad to be back, and I hope you are too. We have another really cool talk tonight. For anybody who is new, um, if you're watching, you should be watching on Twitch. If you are new to Twitch, you can make a free account, and that will allow you to participate in the chat, ask questions, talk with other people during the talk, all that fun stuff. You can make the account for free, and then all you have to do is click the follow button. It's right below the stream in the bottom right. We use that as a sort of protection against like spam bots and things like that. As soon as you click the follow button, you will be able to talk in the chat. And that's important because that's how you ask questions of the speaker tonight. The way you do that is type !Q, and then whatever your question is in the chat. I just gave an example. And I have a program that will collect those automatically, and then we will go through all the questions at the end. Nice thing about this is that the questions will not interrupt the speaker. So, feel free to ask as many questions as you would like at any point during the talk without fear of throwing the speaker off of their talk. We do also have a Discord. I'll drop the link for that as well in the chat real quick. The Discord is laid back just like these streams are. It's all about researchers and scientists trying to help each other and build each other up. Low key, good place to have somebody look at a draft of a paper or help you try and answer some questions that you have. Researchers from all different fields. Probably disproportionately chemists and chemical engineers because that was sort of my background. But even within that, there's pretty much every kind of chemist that you can think of. And people that are also just generally interested in science, even outside of their specialty. So you can pretty much always find some help. If you do have any questions, I will be in the chat during the talk asking my own questions. So certainly feel free to talk there. I'll be happy to try and help you out any way I can with any issues or questions that you might have. So with that, I will introduce our speaker for tonight. It's Dr. Mark Harrison from Chapman University. He's in Fowler School of Engineering as an assistant professor. And he's going to give us a talk tonight about nanophotonic devices for digital information processing. And I was telling Dr. Harrison earlier, I don't really know what that entails. And so I'm really interested to learn about this field. And I hope you are as well. And so with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Harrison. Take it away.
Hey, thanks very much for the introduction. I appreciate it. So I'm going to talk about my work trying to develop and design, these nanophotonic devices for information processing. So to begin with, we can break down what exactly that means. So I'm going to be talking about very small optical devices integrated on wafers. So nanophotonics, because things are at the nanoscale. You might also call this microphotonics, depending on what you're thinking at. Devices on the order of, width of devices, maybe 500 nanometers, 400 nanometers or so. There's a reason why I like to use nanophotonics, but people also talk about integrated photonics. So we're integrating devices together on silicon wafers like you would with electronic devices. There's also an aspect I'm going to talk about digital logic, and by that I mean sort of computing. So when I talk about information processing, sort of computing for communications networks and things like that. We can also think about signal processing. So that could be signal processing also in a computing sense, but I'm going to talk a little bit about things like amplifying signals or regenerating, kind of redigitizing signals. So what is the problem that I'm thinking about? Most of our communication networks use optical fiber for their backbone for transmission. Optical fiber is really great at transmitting data. It's very low loss. This map right here shows a bunch of optical fiber runs for the internet, which is a very well-known communications network. This is kind of how we build out the skeletons of our networks. And we do this at different scales too. So like in a data center, where you're hooking up a bunch of servers together, you also tend to have lots of optical fiber running around because at those sorts of scales, all sorts of length scales, the optical transmission of data is very efficient, especially compared to electronic transmission. But there's an issue with this, and that is if I am sending information in this network, my information doesn't go straight from point A to point B. So if I am, say, serving a live stream and chatting with someone in South Carolina while I'm in Los Angeles, the information packets aren't going to go straight from here to South Carolina, right? They're going to go to a node in the network, kind of get routed, processed and routed to figure out where it needs to go and sent on its way, and kind of bounce around the network a little bit till it gets to its destination. At each of these points, we convert the signal from an optical signal to an electronic signal to do that kind of routing and processing and computing, and then back to an optical signal. We generally refer to this as the OEO problem. And again, this happens at different length scales, kind of size scales as well. So this happens in the internet. This also happens in like a data center scale. And we can kind of think about this for all sorts of different communications networks. So why are we thinking photonic logic circuits? Is really to eliminate this conversion between electrical and optical. So if we can do that, we can reduce power consumption. It takes some power to do the conversion, assuming that the optical processing doesn't consume, an over amount, too much power. We can increase the speed. There's some time associated with the conversion. But there's also kind of a more subtle advantage that we can get that has to do with information encoding. So how we represent our information using optical signals versus electronic signals. So in the electrical domain, when we represent information, we typically use voltage or current, usually voltage, high voltage, low voltage, or a range of voltage to represent that information that we're looking at. But photons, as opposed to electrons, give us some a little bit more flexibility in how we can represent the signal. So for example, you could imagine, we have high voltage and low voltage for ones and zeros in digital systems, but maybe I could keep the power constant, but use a different polarization state to represent these ones and zeros. So a vertically polarized signal is a 1 and a horizontally polarized signal is a 0 maybe. Or if I can resolve those two different polarization states at the end of my transmission line, maybe actually I can have two channels there. And I'm modulating my vertical polarization 1 and 0, high power, low power, my horizontal polarization 1 and 0, high power, low power. And now I've effectively doubled the amount of data I have in that single fiber by putting two channels based on the polarization state. We also can do this, play games with the wavelength of light. So individual photons tend to not really interact with each other. They can interfere if they're landing on top of each other, but going through the transmission line, we can use really closely spaced wavelength channels, as long as we can, again, split them out at the end of the optical fiber. We can resolve these different channels and stuff, maybe 4 or 5, 6 channels, maybe more than that, into a single optical fiber, right? Now we've increased how much information we're kind of packing in at any given moment in time in this transmission line. The kind of simple way of doing this is with power. So that's the number of photons, which is like encoding information with voltage. But then there's also some kind of more exotic ways of doing this. One of the things that people are studying now, I don't work with this, but is using the orbital angular momentum of the photons. So you kind of twist your light and give it more and more orbital angular momentum, twist it. You can do this almost to an arbitrarily high degree to kind of pack in these more and more channels on the same transmission line. And there's issues you have to solve with kind of, again, splitting out those different channels to detect them at the end. But by using optical signals, we can encode, we have all these options for encoding information, but we kind of lose that advantage when we have to process the information electrically, right? Because we can't kind of do this parallel processing with all these channels at once. We have to split them out into the separate electronic channels. But maybe we can think about ways to do this processing optically. So that's what I'm thinking about. So another good question to ask at this point is what is the goal? Okay, I've laid out some of these problems. How do we fix them? What can we do? So my kind of big goal is thinking about how we can make building block photonic circuits. I want to, for digital logic circuits, have devices that we can kind of snap together in arbitrary ways to do photonic integrated circuit design. Now, in doing this, I'm thinking about leveraging kind of how we do things electronically in computer architecture. So in the electrical domain, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, we use these levels of hierarchy and abstraction to make the design easier to do. And we're all using computers right now. We've been very successful at this, right? We have very complicated electronic computers. They're very sophisticated. And getting to that level of sophistication really relies on this abstraction and hierarchy to help us get to that point. It makes the design process much easier. That's really hard to do in the photonic domain based on how these optical devices work and these optical signals kind of interact. So I'd like to find these kind of larger functional designs specific to photonic devices that we can use as building blocks and leverage these kind of signal encoding and signal processing ideas so that we can make these cascadable. So we also, in the optical domain, worry a lot more about power loss and noise for reasons I'll explain in a bit, which makes it hard to assume that you can always connect an input to an output arbitrarily. We have to worry more about signal regeneration. So I'm interested in working on finding ways we can make devices to alleviate that problem. Okay, so that was my little introduction. I'm going to talk about some background. This might be starting from a little bit of a basic point, but I kind of want to make sure everybody's on the same page and then get into some details. But first, let's just talk about waveguides in general. Optical fiber being kind of a prototypical waveguide. So up here we have Snell's law, which you may be familiar with. It governs refraction at the interface between two dielectric materials. If you have a refractive index, which is just a material property that says how light propagates in that material, and another material with another refractive index. If light comes in and hits this interface, it'll refract at a certain angle. If we set up this structure where we have a core and a cladding, and the core has a higher refractive index, so we kind of tilt this angle of incidence out, eventually we will hit a critical angle where this equation cannot be satisfied. And at angles larger than that, we have what's called total internal reflection, where light just does not escape the interface, this dielectric interface. It acts like a mirror. You have seen this effect if you've been in a swimming pool with goggles and you're like near the surface and you look out towards the top of the water. Water has a higher refractive index than air. You'll see like just a reflection off the water. If you look at it at this kind of shallow angle far away, that's a nice example of total internal reflection. But we can use this principle to guide light in a dielectric structure. There's other ways to think about guiding light, but the Snell's law and total internal reflection is a nice entry point to think about. So we can also make optical waveguides in all sorts of different structures. So as I said, an optical fiber is kind of this prototypical, very common waveguide where you have, a cylindrical core and a cylindrical cladding. There's all sorts of different ways you can do this. Modern optical fibers often have actually a gradient. So you can make them really, really low loss if it's all glass and you just kind of slightly dope the core with something to give it a little bit of a higher refractive index, and then it kind of has a gradient going out to the cladding very gently, but enough to guide the light. You can make these really low loss things, but we can think about these hard boundaries between the materials, because that's what I'm working with. And we can kind of take this and stick it onto some sort of integrated device. So these are very common geometries for waveguides in the integrated photonics world. We can kind of embed them or put a strip on top of some surface. Air has a refractive index of about 1, so it's lower than the indices of any of the materials you'd be using. You can vary it as long as the refractive index of the guiding material is higher than its surroundings, and you can guide light. There's also some size limitations that we can think about. As we're thinking about waveguides, we also have to think about loss. As I mentioned, this is kind of a problem that we contend with our integrated photonic devices. But loss we think about, there's a big one, which is propagation loss, which kind of comes in two flavors. Absorption loss is absorption in the material. So these materials tend to not absorb light very much, but they will a little bit. So there's some inherent material loss that we have to worry about. There's also scattering loss. So I'm going to talk about modes on the next slide, but we have this kind of waveguide mode. Even though the light is fully confined in the mode, if we're looking at kind of a wave optics picture, some of the light sticks outside of the core in what we call the evanescent field or evanescent tail. So we have this kind of interaction of the light at the surface of, or the interface between the materials. And hopefully this won't come as a surprise, but fabrication, when we make these devices, it's not perfect. So we can have some surface roughness or things like that that can lead to scattering of the light out of the waveguide, for example. So imperfections in our fabrication really can lead to loss as the light travels down the waveguide. So that's something that we're thinking about as we make these devices. There's a few other things. So if I have a bend in my waveguide, that angle of incidence all of a sudden changes because the curve of the waveguide. So we have a much, instead of a very large angle, it's a shallower angle. And I might violate the total internal reflection condition and have light radiating out because of that. So there is some sort of minimum bend. If I bend it too much, I'm going to incur a lot of loss. But in general, it bends. We get some light radiating out, then kind of cause a little extra loss for us most of the time. We also have to think about coupling loss. So I mentioned these waveguide devices maybe can be on the order of 400 or 500 nanometers wide. Typical optical fiber is, I think the core is typically 125 microns wide. So if you're not used to thinking about things at this small of scale, that would, a human hair is roughly 80 to 100 micrometers in diameter, depending on who you are. So the core of an optical fiber is about as thick as human hair, and 500 nanometers is half a micron. So we're talking about getting light that's confined in something 125 microns down to half a micron. That's a pretty big difference. So we have to think about ways to couple light into these very small devices, typically from optical fiber. And there's some loss often associated with that. And then the last thing I want to define is this concept of insertion loss, which is kind of a way we characterize the overall loss of a device. So if I make some device, maybe it's not just a straight waveguide, but it's doing something for me. If I kind of insert that into the link, there will be some overall loss associated with that. We call that the insertion loss. It's kind of the overall loss for the device. Okay, so you can also think about optical modes of the waveguides. So when I'm talking about modes, I'm really talking about the spatial distribution of the optical fields, that being the electric and magnetic fields of light. A light is an electromagnetic wave. The electric field and magnetic field are perpendicular to each other or orthogonal to each other as a rule. So we can usually just think about one of those fields, and we often do. We kind of we'll just think about the electric field and say, yeah, there's a magnetic field as well. Kind of oscillating and traveling down a wave in this field, traveling down the waveguide. The spatial distribution of light is important. We have some different modes here, a fundamental mode, some sort of second order mode. There's different ways to do the modes in an optical fiber. You have these modes where you have these nodes kind of in straight lines, but you can also have nodes as rings kind of going out. So instead of in the kind of radial direction as well. But these are important because where the light is in the structure can affect these interference patterns. And I'll talk about using the interference of light with itself to kind of create these devices as a principle. So if we're thinking about these modes and kind of how we get to them or how we figure them out, we can think about Maxwell's equations, which govern electric fields and magnetic fields. and we can use them to get a wave equation for the electric field or magnetic field. And we can solve the wave equation for the boundary conditions and initial conditions of the structure we're looking at. It's not always easy for optical fibers, which, like I said, it's a kind of a prototypical waveguide. The solutions are Bessel functions, which are kind of complicated. So we often use tools to help us with this, but the solutions have these different orders of solutions. There's different integer orders, which correspond to the different modes in the system or in the structure. So that's another way we can think about these modes of waveguides. And it is possible to have a single mode supported, basically, if you make it small enough. And it is also possible to have a device that's so small that it does not support any mode, and that usually has to do with the wavelength of light. So light has large wavelengths compared to electronics, so that can kind of size limit us a little bit. Okay. So I also want to talk about phase. Light is a traveling wave, so there's some phase. These red line and this blue line have the same wavelength, so peak to peak or valley to valley is the same distance, but the blue line is shifted in phase by pi over 2 radians or 90 degrees from the red wave. So the phase is kind of often arbitrary, but the light signals we use in our for our communications are coherent. They're all the photons are in phase with each other. So phase is something we can use to create interference patterns again, or I'm going to talk about using it to encode information in a little bit. But when I talk about phase, this is what I'm talking about. Okay, so that was the light background stuff. Let's talk a little bit about digital logic. This maybe obviously has two parts to break down, the digital part and the logic part. So digital is referring to, again, how we're encoding information. We're using digital binary values. I think this is tends to be pretty familiar to many of us these days, but just to kind of make it explicit, this would be in contrast to analog. So say I'm using between 0 volts and 10 volts to represent my data, right? I have this range. If it's analog data, I can take any point in that range as long as I can resolve it with my measurement equipment. And that, that's the data I'm measuring, or it represents some level in the system I'm measuring. In a digital system, we would have some cutoff, say everything above 7 volts is a 1 and everything below 3 volts is a 0. And we just let the voltage go high and low, and we'll have a stream of data and use a collection of bits, 16 bits or 32 bits or 64 bits to represent a binary number value. And we have a string of those that will represent our data somehow, right? So we're using these kind of 1 and 0 values to encode our information digitally, as opposed to our like an analog system. When we're talking about logic, so we're going to talk about digital logic, but logic does exist outside of computing, and these combinations of statements and or not that yield true or false results. Many of us are familiar with coding these days, so these are really similar, analogous to like and or and not statements that you would encounter as you're writing code as well. So digital logic in relation to computing specifically, this is really the basis of our electronic computers. So we have transistors and we construct logic gates. The logic gates are our logic functions, so things like an AND function, A and B, an OR function, A or B. This is XOR, A XOR B, right? We can take some transistors and build these gates out of them that do these logic operations for us. The way we think about it, an AND function is true if both the inputs are true. So in that case, a 1 would represent true and a 0 would represent false. So the output of the AND gate is only 1 if both of the inputs are 1, right? And what we do in computing is we take these gates and we hook them up together to make these larger functional components. So maybe we make like a single bit adder or a multiplexer, and then we can string those together to more complex components, a multi-bit adder or other more complex things, and we eventually can construct things like a processor from this kind of hierarchy that starts with this basic digital logic. And as I said, these gates are analogous really to Boolean operators in computer programming, if that's something you're familiar with. But below the logic gate level are transistors. So I'm talking about logic. I feel like I can't get away without mentioning transistors, right? This is a fundamental technology that makes our computing possible. So fundamentally, a transistor is a switch, right? They allow current to pass from source to drain based on the presence of some signal at the input at the gate, right here, right? So if we have a signal at the gate, we turn this on and we let current pass from source to drain, right? We can hook these together and abstract them into logic gates. As I mentioned at the top, computer architecture, when we're doing this digital design, we have these layers of abstraction. Once I hook up my transistors into a logic gate design, I can stop thinking about the transistors. Now I can just focus on logic gates and hook them up together to make, like I said, an adder or whatever. Then I stop thinking about the logic gates and I hook my adders up together to make a multiplier. And then I stop, I kind of don't have to worry about the underlying devices. Eventually I do, when I'm putting on a chip, I'm fabricating transistors on a chip. So I have to think about it at some point, but when we're doing the design, we can get away with this abstraction, which is really nice in the electronic domain. I think hopefully you'll all agree with me that it has worked very well. We have very powerful computers that we all rely on. They're kind of in everything all the time. But here I want to say that this idea of a switch is not as useful for photonic or optical kind of computing or information processing. And I want to kind of stop and ponder why. I think it's an important thing to think about for a little bit. And I do want to delineate here that optical switches, optical switching actually has useful applications. We can, take an electronic signal and use it to modulate an optical switch to get, to encode the light with that information. There are important uses for it. But as a transistor, I think that it is, there's some problems with it. So one of them is that our optical devices are large compared to transistors. If you're familiar with transistors, they're, I should know what the current node of technology is, but, I think we're at 12 nanometers. We might be smaller than that now. And I mentioned my optical waveguide widths are 400 or 500 nanometers. That's a lot larger. So if we have a bunch of optical switches and we're constructing them into a gate, that's going to be really large. And our optical switches also can tend to be slow compared to the electrical switches. This partially has to do with the fact that photon interactions with materials are very weak. A lot of these ways we can get the materials to change so that the photons or the light signal goes through them tend to be physically slow. And it's hard to work around that. So I have an analogy here that is not mine. It comes from a mentor of mine, but I think it's a useful way to think about this. And that's the idea of an aluminum feather. So if you are trying to figure out how to build a flying machine, you might look at birds and study them and look at how they fly to try to figure out how this works. And you would say, okay, wings are important for birds to fly. Think, birds have wings and that seems to allow them to fly. And okay, the wings are made of feathers, so feathers must be important for them to fly. So let me see if I can make some feathers, right? Aluminum is a lightweight inserting material. I'll make some aluminum feathers and fashion a wing out of aluminum feathers. But I think now we can all kind of see the error in thinking there, right? It's not really the feathers that allow flight. It's the shape of the wing that enables flight. And feathers are important for birds in generating that shape of the wing, but they are not essential to shaping a wing that can fly, right? So in the same way, I think that looking for a photonic transistor as the basis of this computing is like looking for an aluminum feather, right? We're kind of looking at the wrong part of the system. the wrong kind of scale of where we should be solving this problem. So I'm trying to look at ways we can build the wing and what exactly that wing is in terms of this photonic computing. Okay, let's talk about specifics. I'm going to talk about plasmonics a little bit, phase shift keying, which are phase encoding, and some basic kind of devices that we can do stuff with. So silicon photonics is really, I would say, maybe kind of the state of the art. Why do we think about silicon photonics? I mean, the U.S. government just passed that CHIPS bill, right? We're investing a bunch in silicon semiconductor manufacturing because that's what our computer chips are made out of, right? We have a ton of infrastructure in making small things out of silicon and related materials. So we have this infrastructure, this common fabrication, and we can make photonic devices using these same technologies. So in the integrated photonics world, we are all very excited about ways we can leverage CMOS as the technology, the CMOS fabrication techniques. You see it all over these papers, and that just means, hey, let's make this using commonly used fabrication devices or devices that would fit in, these foundries that exist, so that we can take advantage of all that technology development that's been happening for computers. So silicon photonics is, I say maybe state of the art in the sense that like these types of devices are what you might find starting to come out commercially. They tend to be relatively large, especially compared to electronic devices, but we can make them low loss, and we can fabricate them with high yields and stuff. So I'm not interested in silicon photonics. Of course, I'm interested. Class of devices are these plasmonic waveguides. So chemists may be familiar with plasmonics, and often plasmonics there's kind of two flavors, I think, about plasmonics: localized surface plasmons and surface plasmon polaritons. So the flavor I'm not going to be talking about is the localized surface plasmon, which is like metal nanoparticles, where you can kind of get this resonance of light confined around these very small metal particles, which can be very useful for heating things up or enhancing certain effects. I'm going to talk about surface plasmon polaritons. So what is a plasmon? A plasmon happens when our optical fields couple to electron oscillations at the interface between a dielectric and a metal surface. So you have some metal in the system and some sort of dielectric. Air is a dielectric in this case, or a dielectric like strip on the surface. This type of structure is a dielectric loaded surface plasmon polariton waveguide, which I'm interested in because, well, there's a few reasons, but one of the reasons is this kind of structure tends to have a little bit lower loss than some other plasmonic waveguides. So we call these things can be treated like light. We can kind of find solutions with Maxwell's equations, but we have these electronic oscillations at the interface, which turn out to be important, give it some different qualities. So we give it this name plasmon. They're not photons traveling down the surface of things, they're plasmons. And these electron oscillations can be useful to us, but they also incur some high loss. We have these ohmic losses because there's essentially resistance in the metal. The electrons are interacting with the material in a much more significant way than the light is really interacting with the dielectric material. So this is something that we have to contend with. That is important. But so that sounds, I've talked about problems. What is the benefit? Why are we interested in this? It's really the tight confinement and high intensities we can get. So for this kind of structure here, here I have a simulation showing the this is the magnetic field actually here, but so in the horizontal direction of this cross section, this is really just this device here. You can see the outline of the dielectric. The confinement of the light is really dielectric or photonic, not really plasmonic, right? This waveguide here is kind of defining where the light is guided. But in the vertical direction, we have basically an exponential decay away from the metal. It's really high intensity right down here at the metal surface. And then inside the metal, we have just like the barest little bit of a magnetic field, but it decays really quickly. It's really all happening right at this surface here. That can maybe help us make some smaller devices, but it can also be useful when it comes to some other effects. I'm going to talk about nonlinear optics towards the end, and having high intensity is important and helpful for that. So I'm also interested in phase shift keying. I kind of alluded to this, but this is using phase to encode our digital information. So at a base level, we can think about binary phase shift keying. So here at the top, we have this kind of phasor diagram. This circle is swinging around. This I don't know how you can see the color, but this green arrow here corresponds to the phase of this green sine wave kind of flowing through. We can think of it as a sum of like the phase of the red sine wave and the blue sine wave interfering together creates this green sine wave, right? But yeah, this is the phase of light going through. This phasor diagram, basically, it's like a unit circle going around is the phase, and then going out from the center, it's like polar coordinates is like the amplitude of light. So, okay, we can have 180 degrees of phase or pi radians of phase and 0 radians of phase to represent a 0 and a 1. Do some binary phase shift keying, but we can also think about denser encoding schemes. So that will be if we, say, used 4 points on the circle. So 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2 radians to represent information. So each of those points of phase could represent 2 bits for us. So we have a 0, 0, a 0, 1, a 1, 0, a 1, 1. So at every point in time where electrically or in another encoding scheme, I'd be sending 1 bit of information. I'm now sending 2 bits. We call that a symbol. And I can take it further. I can have 8 locations and have 3 bits per location, or even more. As long as I can resolve those phase differences at the end of the line, I can encode information pretty densely. Now, I want to be clear, there are other ways to encode information even more densely. Over here, I have this system quadrature amplitude modulation, which uses phase and amplitude to encode information. So again, phase is like the angle of the unit circle, and the amplitude of light is the distance from the center, kind of like polar coordinates. Whereas our phase shift keying, everything's at the same amplitude. We're just shifting the phase around the circle. So I can see that this is more dense. Why am I not interested in this? It has to do with how we get to processing. So imagine I'm doing, say, a +2 operation. Really, I want to take, if this point represents 2, or maybe I'm at 0, and that's this is 0, I add 2. I'm going to shift to this point, which represents 0. 0 plus 2 is 2. From here, I want to shift to 4. You can see the shift from 0 to 2 and 2 to 4 is different. If I'm at 0, I have to figure out, switching my phase and maybe a little bit amplitude, but it's a totally different, backward phase adjustment going to 4. And what if I'm at 14 and I roll over? 14 plus 2 should bring me to 0. That's also like a wildly different state transition, which makes our information processing difficult. So this works nicely for transmission, but it's not so nice if we're trying to process these multi-bit things. Phase shift keying, on the other hand, is really nice in this regard. So if I'm doing a 2 plus 2 operation, I'm shifting by, in this case, 90 degrees of phase. Well, if I'm at 7 and I'm doing a +2 operation, I want my system to roll over. That's also just a nice 90-degree phase shift. I have all my transitions are the same, basically. So I think this is a nice in between. It's maybe not the most dense way of encoding information, but it'll allow us to process information. So I'm interested in building up to these kind of multi-bit symbols. We're starting with binary phase shift keying right now because it's they were trying to make it a solvable problem, but I hope to get into quadrature phase shift keying. So 4 points pretty soon. I have some or we're working on it. I don't have any results yet to share, unfortunately, but this is what we're thinking about. And this is motivation that's driving our work right now. So finally, for some of these specifics, or more general specifics, if you will, I'm interested in multi-mode interferometer devices. So what this means is, this is an outline of that, for that dielectric loaded kind of stack up I showed earlier. The copper color here is the dielectric, on a metal surface. So this is the shape of my device. So in a multimode interferometer, I will have one or more inputs that are single mode. So these waveguides only support a single mode, and then a wide multimode region. What happens is the light comes in here and excites a bunch of modes. The modes travel at different speeds, and we get these interference patterns. So here is the interference pattern if the two inputs are in phase with each other. I get these hot spots. If I put an output right here, I will get really high efficient light coming into this output, and I have this kind of 2-to-1 combiner that works very nicely. I could put it at these other hot spots. If I make my inputs for the exact same device 180 degrees out of phase with each other, I get this completely different interference pattern. And if I make them 90 degrees out of phase with each other, or pi over 2 radians, I get this very wild interference pattern. So you might be starting to think, well, okay, based on the phase of the inputs, I can get these different interference patterns that causes different device behavior. And this is our thought. We can try to leverage this for device design. So let's do some simulation design. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do simulations in my field a little bit, and then also this topic of inverse design, which is increasingly popular. So I primarily work with these finite difference time domain simulations where we can solve for very complicated geometries. So as I mentioned, even our optical fiber feels nice and comfortable. The cylindrical fiber has a complicated solution. If you have, this is something I did as a grad student, this kind of, there's two trapezoids connected by a thin membrane, a very kind of unique structure, would probably next to impossible to solve analytically, if not impossible, but we could simulate it and see what's going on pretty well. So these simulations are nice for rapid iteration and optimization. The finite difference time domain is nice because it basically allows us to calculate the light propagating through the structure. So it's doing a numeric solutions to Maxwell's equations for us, or the wave equation, I suppose. And increasingly too, with increased computational power, we can do this better and better and iterate more and more quickly. And it's cheaper, much cheaper than making these devices. So this is the way we kind of do things. We do lots of simulations, come up with a device, and then make it and make sure it works the way it's simulated. But there's this new-ish frontier of inverse design, and inverse design is not unique to nanophotonics. It shows up in other fields as well. But traditional design can be slow, right? We have a lot of parameters to optimize, a lot of knobs we can turn, and they may be interdependent. So if I'm thinking about my MMI device, I can adjust the width of the input waveguides. I can adjust the length of this thing, the width of the MMI region. And I might be able to, sweep along the length of it, like run a bunch of simulations at different lengths and find whatever the optimum length is. But now if I start adjusting the width, the optimum length for a given width might be different. So this is maybe not the most efficient way of doing design. So the idea of inverse design is saying, okay, I'm going to define some output that instead of turning these knobs and seeing how the output changes, I'm going to say, this is the output I want to be. I'm going to let the computer adjust some set of parameters for me to get that point. The inverse design we're doing is topology. So basically in our region, we're deciding whether or not we want to place material there to get our result that we want. And the nice thing about inverse design is we can, also specify some other parameters like, a range of widths for fabrication tolerances, right? We can say, okay, if there's a little bit of error in fabrication, this device will still work to make it, more robust in that sense. So the FDTD simulation tool I use has an inverse design tool, and we decided to apply this to see if we could design an XOR gate using inverse design with this dielectric loaded surface mass plasmon polariton architecture and see how well we could do. So what we did was we made this device with 2 inputs and 2 outputs. And the output, where light goes, is selected on the relative phase of the inputs. So if the inputs are in phase with each other, their difference is 0 degrees, the light will go to the bottom output. If the difference is 180 degrees, light will go to the top output. So here would be the relative phase of the 2 inputs, the 2 in phase, so 2 peaks basically, and then this is a peak and a valley. So why do we just do these 2 conditions? Well, that turns out to be a limitation of our inverse design tool. We actually can't specify more than 1 input. So we have 1 input source, and we use what's called a coupled mode source. So it's a single mode. These 2 modes are kind of coupled together, and it's a symmetric mode and anti-symmetric mode. But we can rerun it afterwards with separated modes, and we get the same results. We have to kind of trick the tool into doing this kind of phase encoding for us. And that's the extent to which we could trick the tool. I'll talk about this a little bit too, is we have these 2 outputs. Now, the inputs are encoded in phase, but the outputs here are going to be encoded in amplitude, which is not, again, really what we want, but is a limitation of the inverse design tool. So we can only specify where we want the light to go. We can't specify anything about the phase. So we're going to set up this thing, and our parameter space is this kind of box in the middle. And there's these 20 nanometer kind of pixels, and the computer is going to decide whether we have the dielectric material there or background material, which in our case is air there. So the way this kind of inverse design algorithm works, if this, you imagine, is our full parameter space. So on the z-axis would be our figure of merit, the thing we're trying to optimize, where we want the light to go, or say minimize. You can define it either way. And we have 2 parameters. Well, this might be a complicated function of the parameters, right? And if we can't solve it analytically, we can't really get a full mapping of the space. So maybe we try to do a parameter sweep, and we do 5 different parameters on this axis, 5 different parameters on this axis, and we run all these points. That's 25 simulations, and we have this really rough mapping. We can say, okay, this is the minimum point, and maybe that will work for us, but pretty positive that's not going to be right exactly at the minimum, right? It's going to be close, but this is a very crude map, and this is kind of the way we would approach things without inverse design. The inverse design that we're running is using something called the adjoint method, which again, is not unique to the world of integrated photonics and nanophotonics. But the way it works is that you run the simulation, you run 2 simulations. So you have your base, a set of parameters, you run it in the forward direction, the normal simulation, then you flip the input and the output, and you run the adjoint simulation, or the reverse simulation. From those 2, you can estimate the gradient of this surface, this figure of merit surface. So you estimate, say I'm trying to find the minimum, I'm right here. I estimate the gradient, and then I take a small step in that direction, reset all the parameters. And I take a small step and not a big step, because I want to avoid local minimums. I'm trying to find the global. They take a small step, you rerun it, and you iterate this a bunch of times. So here's what this looks like. I like this video. I'll play it in a second. I think it's fun to watch. The 2 boxes I think you should focus on are this top left and bottom left box. This one has to do with the gradients, and this one has to do with where the light is in the structure. But this one is going to show the structure start to emerge. So we're starting from a refractive index. Every pixel here has a refractive index halfway between our waveguide and our background, which is not realistic, but the way the inverse design optimizes it first is it uses a gradient between material and no material, essentially. You can have any value for refractive index between there. Then it's going to go through a binarization phase. This top one is showing the evolution of the figure of merit versus iterations. So let's see if we can. Oh, hold on. There we go. All right. So we can see the structure start to evolve. Inverse design results in these very cool kind of alien, non-intuitive structures, I like to say, things you would not come up with yourself, for better and for worse. It's hard to make small adjustments to the design. You see it start to binarize right now, and you're getting this kind of more concrete structure, and then it finishes. So this one took about 100 iterations, not terribly long. And we have this kind of cool, weird structure that we would never think of that does the thing that we want it to do. So let's look at what we actually got. So we chose to operate at a wavelength of 1310 nanometers, which is there are two kind of main communications wavelengths of light, 1550 nanometers or 1.55 micrometers, and 1310 nanometers or 1.31 roughly micrometers. These outlines again are the structures. So this is our inverse design at the top. You can see this weird blobby structure. And you can kind of see the square that the optimization region was. And we have two input waveguides and two output waveguides. And we compared this to a conventionally designed structure. The structure we kind of borrowed from some other folks, but another group used in a different way. This little bump right here causes pi over 2 radians phase offset. So if light is in phase coming in here, it's going to be 90 degrees out of phase. If these are, say, 180 degrees out of phase, it's going to be 90 degrees out of phase in the other direction, right? So it's creating this, that kind of chaotic interference pattern that we saw from the earlier MMI simulations. And then we have these two outputs. So our two outputs are actually, the top one's going to act as an XOR gate for us, and the bottom is XNOR, which is the inverse of the XOR. So here's our truth table for an XOR gate. The output is 1 if the inputs are different from each other. So what this means for phase is if our inputs are in phase, both 0 degrees of phase or both 180 degrees of phase, our output's going to be 0 on the XOR, but 1 on the XNOR, both the inverse design and our kind of conventional design. If they're out of phase with each other, then we're going to get power at the top, 1 for our XOR and 0 for the XNOR. Again, our inputs are encoded in phase. For this, our outputs are encoded in amplitude because of the limitation of the inverse design tool. So this is what it looks like in the simulations. I should have maybe walked through this a little bit. The white line is the outline of the structure in these simulations. So you can see structure overlaid. And then this color is the power, measuring the power. This is basically where the light is in the structure, right? You get this kind of interference pattern. On the left side, we have the in-phase condition, and the light goes to the bottom port. In our out-of-phase condition, the light goes to the top port. So we're able to make this device, and it works. But let's try to quantify how well it works. So one thing is these two, I should point out, are to scale. So we can see right here that the inverse design device is much smaller than the conventionally designed device. But we can characterize them. So we characterize the insertion loss. It's the loss of the system. Calculate loss, just the power out over the power in. This we report in decibels, the common way to do it. So for loss, less decibels is better. We can characterize it for when we're doing it in the XNOR condition versus the XOR condition. And we can see that the inverse design has lower loss, which is good. We can also think about the extinction ratio. This is sort of the performance. So this is a ratio of the on and off in the port. So the power when it's on, and then if we have any power leaking out when it's off. And we want this to be a high contrast. So here we want a big number. We can see actually the inverse design is not as good as the conventional design, but it's still in an acceptable range. And then we can compare the area and see that the inverse design is much smaller, which is good because we want to have smaller devices so we can pack more and more of them on a chip. We also are working on some other devices. So looking at some other kind of basic devices, we have a Y splitter here, an inverse design and a conventional design. These are not to scale. The inverse design is much smaller. We can characterize the insertion loss. These both have a nice 50-50 splitting ratio. This is just to split light into two channels. You can see we make this with a smaller area. So for consistency, we're kind of using these MMI devices as a starting point. There's other ways to make Y splitters as well, but we can do a pretty good job here. And we're thinking moving forward about how we can combine these kind of base devices in different ways to, like I said, get that phase encoding on the outputs and have kind of get the full package that we're looking for. Now I want to shift a little bit and talk about this regeneration aspect of what we're working on. So you may recall, or may not, at the top I talked about regeneration of the signal. So this is really just reamplification of the signal, right? We have signal loss as the device, light travels down the device. And it's also a redigitization of the signal. So for this phase encoded signal, for us, that means kind of phase squeezing. So if this is, say, this is a cartoon diagram, not real data. So if we're thinking about what noise looks like in this phase encoded system, it's the spreading out of phase, right? So as it travels down, we might get this noise where our nice phase points tend to blob out, this constellation diagram, right? So if the phase gets to this point, this crossover point, then we can't distinguish if the signal was here or here. We want to kind of redigitize before we get to that point. So that's phase squeezing. There are some techniques usually done with fiber optic big systems where we can either selectively amplify specific phases or do stuff to kind of squeeze these in to get kind of a more compact phase distribution. Often using some nonlinear optics, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. We also need to worry about amplification and kind of reboosting the signal, which might actually cause some phase noise. So this is a problem that we kind of have on our radars. We're looking at the phase squeezing first, kind of how we balance between phase squeezing and amplification, and making sure that we're not adding too much noise back into the system, how we can balance those two things. So in order to do this, we're looking at a class of materials called epsilon near zero materials. Epsilon in this case is the dielectric constant, which is a material property. It's, the refractive index squared is the dielectric constant. For epsilon near zero materials, we're actually considering the complex dielectric constant. So it's a complex quantity with the imaginary part more or less representing loss in the system. But there's this class of materials where at a particular wavelength, the real part of epsilon crosses from positive to negative, right? So this is a wavelength dependent value, as is the refractive index. It'll kind of cross over at the zero wavelength, and around that wavelength, we get this weird behavior, as happens with lots of things in physics. When you start throwing zeros around, things start to get a little weird and interesting. So we can see some controllable absorption or transparency. So you can make, by adding voltage, you can, kind of push this around and make the material kind of highly absorbing or highly transparent for really thin materials. We can do some different sorts of nonlinear optics and wave mixing, which is interesting. And these tend to be pretty fast effect. Excuse me. Not drinking enough water. These tend to be pretty fast effects. And I mentioned one of our problems with some of these, like with optical switches in particular, is they can be slow, but this can be fast. So nonlinear optics comes into play because this wave mixing is kind of an important ingredient in that phase squeezing I talked about. So we're looking at using these epsilon near zero materials to do some wave mixing. So let's talk about wave mixing for a second. There's all sorts of nonlinear optic effects, but one of them is three-wave mixing. It's a second order effect. So a material might have a chi2 coefficient to it. So nonlinear optics in general, light tends to not really interact with matter very strongly. Light also doesn't really interact with other light very strongly. We can get interference patterns if light's right on top of each other, but if you have two laser beams and you kind of cross the beams, it's not like Ghostbusters. Nothing exciting happens. The light just kind of passes through one another. There's no lightsaber clang or anything fun like that. light basically ignores other light, photons ignore other photons. But there are these classes of materials where we can get light interacting with other light mediated by the material. And one of these interactions is three-wave mixing. So three-wave mixing, if we have if we send in two photons at a frequency, angular frequency omega-1 and omega-2, we usually write this out in angular frequency, although the frequency of light is related to the wavelength of light via the speed of light. So if we talk about frequency, we get wavelength. So in a second order wave mixing process, we get this omega-1 photon mixing with an omega-2 photon, and we get a different photon popping out that has the frequency is the sum of those two frequencies. And we can kind of mix this around. We can do a difference generation, or we can consider a degenerate case where we have two of the same photon frequency or wavelength coming in, we get double the frequency or half the wavelength out. Now, I want to mention that this process is not, it depends on nonlinearities in the material, but the wavelengths are not determined by the material. So if we think about, like, say, you may be familiar with like fluorescence, right, which depends on the energy levels of the material, right? The material will absorb photons of a specific wavelength because that corresponds to a specific energy, and fluoresce at a different wavelength, also corresponding to some actual energy transition in the material. But in nonlinear optics, we have this absorption, but this is a virtual energy level. So if we change the wavelengths, we can change the frequency we're generating, which makes it very flexible, very interesting. It's still mediated by the material. The material needs to be there, but it's this interaction. It's kind of helping this interaction between these photons happen. So one material that's nice to a nice epsilon near zero material is ITO, or indium tin oxide. This is a transparent conducting oxide. It's common in electronics. You have like an LED that you want to, say, have in your TV, and you want light to come out of one electrode on one side. ITO is a nice transparent conductor. It conducts, but light more or less passes through it at visible wavelengths. But around our kind of communication wavelengths, we can make this to be in that epsilon near zero range. So we did some simulations where we used some available data sets for ITO and kind of tweaked it to have this near zero crossover at our wavelength of interest. And we can get our simulations to pop out our second harmonic right here. So this is the degenerate case, second harmonic generation. We have, so this is arbitrary, or this is wavelength on the bottom here, the spectra, and the electric field in arbitrary units. So half of 1500 is 750. We can do some frequency generation. So you have to do, 1 over 1500 plus 1 over 1460 equals 1 over 740 is the math there. But the two pumps generate their own second harmonics, but also this extra wavelength that's kind of halfway in between the two. We can also do difference frequency. So if we pump with 740 and pump with 1500, we can get this 1460 out. This magnitude is actually the same as these, but it gets kind of buried in this tail here in this log plot. But okay, so this is just simulations. Let's try to do this in real life. So we set up this experiment. We bought these ITO coated glass slides just commercially. We found this paper that showed that as bought, these slides have from a particular company have epsilon near zero near 1280 nanometers, which is close to 1310 nanometers. So we used a 1310 nanometer laser. And we just shine the light. We use a prism to couple light into this ITO glass coated slide that is not treated or done anything with at all. And we use a couple of mirrors to couple the light coming out of it into an optical spectrum analyzer that measures the power of light for us at different wavelengths. So here we have a simulation of that 1310 nanometer interaction. We get our second harmonic. And here we have our actual experimental data where we have our second harmonic coming out just from shooting this light into this ITO coated slide. So that's pretty cool. We also want to see if we do our sum frequency. So we've got another laser, which is not as nice of quality. So you ever wondered what a good quality laser and a bad quality laser looks like, you can see on this plot right here, the spectrum, where our nice laser has this nice sharp peak, and our not as nice laser, which did not cost nearly as much, has a nice broad peak and a lower power, kind of spread out and noisy looking. So as a result, the nonlinear interactions depend on the intensity, and this laser has a lower intensity. So we get our 3 peaks for our some frequency generation, but this center peak has a lower power than the second harmonic of the nice laser, and then the second harmonic of the bad laser has an even lower power. But also we can, this laser is tunable, so we can shift the wavelength and see our peaks move. And this is a pretty preliminary data set. I had my student look at the ratio of the power coming from the pumps to the power coming from the nonlinear generated peaks. So we're making these new wavelengths of light and seeing what that dependence looks like. So we definitely have some outliers. You can take this linear fit with a very healthy grain of salt as we have more data to take. But you might expect as we get away from that near zero wavelength, our effect seems to maybe start to weaken a little bit. That's kind of what I might expect to happen. So hopefully we can get a more robust data set and kind of show that. But I think that that's interesting. And this, is kind of our first steps towards using this to do some of that regeneration. We're working on how we can kind of integrate this material and to do these sorts of things on chip. But this has, been very exciting for me to kind of generate these wavelengths in this experiment, without really needing to do much to the material. So looking forward a little bit, I mentioned getting things on chip. So kind of what we're working on moving forward is, making these larger integrated circuits. So one way to get light into chip is use this grating coupler. You have it's like a diffraction grating, just a periodic structure that can redirect the energy of light into the waveguide. We're working on designing and optimizing some of these structures to make them efficient for our chosen kind of dielectric loaded surface plasma and polariton waveguide architecture. We're working out some kinks with fabrication. So here are some SEM micrographs of actually fabricated devices. Now you can see that our fabrication maybe did not work out as well as we wanted to. Some missing stuff here, the dielectric, which is silicon dioxide on top of our metal layer. But we have another batch that I have not had a chance to take pictures of yet, but I think should be better. So we're starting to fabricate these devices so we can actually test them and see how they work in the real world. And we do that with this kind of setup. So we have this waveguide device testing setup where we have our devices on this stage where we can align some optical fibers for input and output and check stuff out with the top view camera and a side view camera. Now, measuring the phase dependence is a little tricky, actually. So this little diagram, we've kind of prepped this. We haven't been able to use it on our devices yet, but we do this technique. We can do this technique called coherent detection, where if we take the laser, we can split into 2 paths. One path goes into the device, and we modulate the phase in some way. So it's going through the device, and then the other path will just kind of bypass everything. We can send it to a mixer. So we can modulate the power between the splitting to make sure it's mixing in roughly equal power. And we send it to this balanced photodetector that has 2 matched photodiodes kind of set in opposite polarities, and they mix together the signal. So we can basically translate the interference and phase to like an electrical signal, right? So high to low, we can kind of see what the phase variation is, right? So we can detect our phase, which is what we're going to want to do and get these phase encoded outputs. This is what this testing setup kind of looks like in real life. We got this online recently, so I was excited to kind of share it. This was a long time coming, but we have our cameras here. All this big stuff around this very tiny area. These things where we can couple light in with different tilt angles and position things very precisely. So on the right-hand side here, we get this, you can see the fibers coming into our chip with little devices there. They look like they're touching. They're not quite touching. They're pretty close together, but we can see in the camera that they're not to get that light in and out of the chip. And then back here, we have, some lasers and stuff and mass, a little Chapman flag that a student left on the table. All good stuff for an active lab, I suppose. um, yeah, and then our next step is to, again, we're trying to do these building block components. So once we have the building block components, we can Lego them together into some larger design, right? And also stick that regeneration aspect in there so we can hopefully demonstrate some larger design that's making use of these things that does this processing that we want to do. So with that, I will thank you for listening to my talk that was longer than when I was practicing it. I must have been more nervous when practicing. I want to say thank you to the students who worked on this. So Chapman is, at the moment, I've been working with just undergraduate students. We're primarily undergraduate. So these great students are all computer science students or software engineering, or Nick actually was computer engineering, not in the realm of like physics or photonics at all, and all had their hands on different parts of the work that I presented tonight. So I want to recognize them, and I am happy to take questions.
Fantastic. It's a very, very interesting and nicely detailed talk. So we will jump right into the questions here. So first question here, this was, I think, back towards the beginning of the talk. You were talking about like the core and the casing. Are there limits in how big the core can or should be?
Yes. So at some point, it's you will start to lose your coherence basically. So we can make what you might call a light guide instead of a waveguide, where you can efficiently kind of transmit the light. But that might be better for like a microscope if you're transmitting light from point A to point B. But that coherence is kind of necessary when we're talking about encoding signals and making sure we can resolve our ones and zeros, whether it's encoded in amplitude or phase. So in that sense, there ends up being a limit eventually for that kind of keeping the coherence of the laser light.
Okay, that makes sense. What software are you using for the FDT modeling?
We use a software called Lumerical FDTD, which is a pretty popular one for doing this design. And the honest reason for why I use that design is working with primarily undergraduates. It's really easy to use. There are some other simulation softwares that have different pros and cons, but Lumerical has a really nice GUI. The downside of that is it's really easy to simulate things that are not realistic. We do have to be a little careful. You can set up, kind of whatever you want. But yeah, that's what we're using.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's see. How feasible is it to actually deposit materials in the manner that was determined with the gradient descent thing? So like this is where you showed the first modeling result that's kind of had the kind of crazy design to it.
Yeah, so I'll go back to these SEM pictures because this is our first attempt at some of these, and there was some problems with how we. There were a few problems that weren't necessarily related to just the fabrication process, but also how we like drew out the designs. But we're using this was done with electron beam lithography, which is a pretty actually complicated process. We'd rather use other types of lithography, but electron beam lithography and a lift-off method, if anybody's familiar with nanofabrication or microfabrication, is what we did for these ones.
Okay. Let's see. So this one, how big is the simulation gap for this problem?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah. How big is the simulation gap for this problem? So I think they're asking about, I guess, basically how well does the simulation represent reality in terms of the actual device, I guess.
I see. That's a good question. So we unfortunately haven't had devices that have worked for fully characterizing it. In general, the simulations are always ideal, right? So I actually consider myself an experimentalist. I think it's really important to do the experiment. Very often this comes in terms of extra loss. So these devices are small. It's actually really hard to like perfectly align stuff to the grading coupler so that we are coupling light in and out with the highest efficiency. there's fabrication variations, right? So I mentioned one nice thing about the inverse design is we can make it more robust to that. So one, over or under exposure, you can get some variation in the width of these things, right? Which can really mess up how it works, but we can kind of build that into the inverse design, which is kind of more susceptible to that. One of the reasons I didn't mention this, one of the reasons why I like MMI devices is they tend to be actually pretty robust to these fabrication tolerances.
Okay.
So as a non-inverse designed platform, I think that's a big pro of those types of devices. Yeah, we expect, what my biggest expectation is that all the loss will be higher. But generally how the device will work will probably be pretty close. It probably won't be quite as efficient, but the general behavior will be pretty good.
That's still pretty good then. Okay. Let's see. What mechanically is happening inside the logic gate? If it's wave interference, how do you decide to set thresholds for what counts as a 0 versus a 1? And is it the same for every kind of gate?
That's a really good question. So this is something where in this world, folks sometimes define like those thresholds as in the way that works for them
Okay.
to make it. So in this case, to be clear, the way we're defining it is power at the output. So where there a 0 should be, there's no optical power. That's, I guess, what I was trying to show with this extinction ratio, right? So that's the ratio between how much light is coming out where there should be 0 light versus how much light is coming out where we expect there to be something, right?
Okay.
The ratio of those powers. So this should be, very as large as possible. But the way we want to define it eventually is the phase of this light coming here, and I've seen people define it in in some different ways. So maybe they have like a low power and high power. So instead of saying 0 light, it's 2 microwatts versus 20 microwatts, or they have some threshold for their device, some way that makes sense. But that's another kind of going back to the building blocks thing. This another issue I see with these, and why I kind of want to have this building block is sometimes it feels it's a little bit of the Wild West. People come up with this cool device, but how do I attach one thing to the other thing where I'm kind of arbitrarily deciding what my output should look like versus what the inputs are? And I'm maybe being a little uncharitable to my colleagues in the field and how I'm characterizing this, but sometimes it does kind of feel like, we define this in the way that made it work the best.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's common. That's very, very common. Like, come on, guys, this is the best way to do it. Come on.
Yeah.
So do you foresee some sort of standardization of these types of definitions? I mean, whether it's in the near future or 10 years out, do you think that's something that will have to happen eventually?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that we actually have started to see this a little bit. So there are some foundries out there in the US and other countries that are actually starting to build these, they have these process design kits. They'll make these photonic integrated circuits, usually in silicon on insulator or silicon nitride platforms, where they have these basic kind of photonic components. Now, they're not digital logic photonic components. They're different they're things more like the Y splitters and grading couplers, to give some things I showed, or maybe ring resonators, which can be useful for other things. So you're still doing kind of this kind of more holistic design, but for each of those individual devices, they have their performance really well characterized. So really what to expect when you put it into links. So we've already started to see some standardization in that realm, and I think that eventually it'll get to some of this logic stuff if we can show that that's useful.
No, that's good. And so the last question here is, what's the ultimate goal in terms of size and power of these nanophotonic devices?
That's a good question. So I'm not sure I have a good answer for that, mostly because we have so far kind of ignored that.
Okay.
That's a question I think that will come down actually to more of the regeneration aspect of things. So a device like this is mostly passive, right? Like whatever power I put in, I'm just I'm not pumping any power to make this device work, right?
Right.
Um, a transistor, loses some power when we switch it. This is, purely transformational, right? It's transforming based on the interference, the power coming out. But when we get to regeneration, we will talk about actively kind of putting power into the system. We
Mhm.
also need to think about what kind of power we need to make the light go all the way through an entire link of these things. So I don't think I have a great answer for that. But I think that if we're talking about like a general goal, we can look at the electronic systems that are out there. And I think that, if we are getting close to those, right, that eliminating the conversion, then we have a good argument that this is, uh, you know, a nice replacement, because at the very least, like, oh, we're not taking any more power, and maybe we're saving some bandwidth that might be helpful or something like that. But I do think that that's a good question that I don't really have a great answer to.
Okay. No, I think that was still a good answer. So I think that's all the questions we got, unless somebody sneaks one in here at the last minute. So I'll go ahead and start wrapping up and say thank you again for a fantastic talk. It's really cool work that you're doing. And you did a really nice job of explaining what you're doing and why, which is always really nice. Um, so I'll say thank you as well to everybody that came out. And yeah, we don't have a talk scheduled for next week, but we do have the one week after that. So I hope you all come back for that. And with that, I will say have a great weekend, everybody. See you next time.